Audrey Griffin was the heart of her peaceful Brisbane neighborhood, creative, kind, and admired by everyone she met. But when she suddenly vanished without a trace, all eyes turned to her mysterious neighbor, Kellan Varnett, a man with no past and too many secrets. As Detective Mara Litham dug deeper, the horrifying truth unraveled. Audrey's disappearance was only the beginning of a nightmare tied to Kellan's disturbed brother, Silas Mears, and a hidden history of obsession, captivity, and murder that no one saw coming. Audrey Griffin had always been the kind of person people admired from afar. At 33, she had managed to build a reputation for herself in Brisbane's design circles. Her flair for transforming dull, lifeless spaces into vibrant, magazine-worthy homes earned her both professional praise and community admiration. She didn't crave the spotlight, but it followed her anyway. Audrey lived on a quiet, tree-lined street nestled in a peaceful suburb, where families walked their dogs and weekend barbecues were a tradition. The neighborhood felt safe, almost untouched by the world's chaos. That's what made what happened to Audrey all the more chilling. It began like any other Monday. Imogen Rise, Audrey's best friend and business partner, had scheduled a client walkthrough with her that morning. They were working on renovating a historical home nearby, and Audrey was supposed to meet her on site by 9 a.m. sharp. But when 9 o'clock came and went, and Audrey didn't respond to calls or texts, Imogen started to worry. Audrey was never late. She was precise, punctual, and meticulous in all aspects of her life. By 10 a.m., the worry had turned into dread. Imogen drove straight to Audrey's home. The driveway was occupied by Audrey's car. The front garden looked untouched, and the porch light, oddly, was still on even though it was mid-morning. When Imogen knocked on the door and got no response, she pushed it gently. To her surprise, it creaked open. The house was eerily quiet. Audrey's purse sat on the kitchen counter. Her phone was charging beside it, and her keys hung in their usual spot by the door. But Audrey was nowhere to be found. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken windows, no blood, no overturned furniture. Just silence. It was as if Audrey had vanished into thin air. Imogen called the police, and within the hour, officers were canvassing the neighborhood, asking questions, taking notes. Missing person reports were filed, and the street that had always felt safe now buzzed with whispers, theories, and an uneasy sense that something dark had slipped into their lives unnoticed. Detective Mara Litham took the lead. Known for her methodical approach, she immediately began looking at Audrey's schedule, recent interactions, and home security footage. Unfortunately, the doorbell camera had stopped recording 3 days prior due to a dead battery. Still, neighbors offered what little they could. Most of them reported nothing unusual, no late-night disturbances, no strangers lurking. But one name kept coming up in the conversations: Kellan Varnett. Kellan had moved in just 3 weeks before Audrey disappeared. He lived alone in the house directly next to hers. According to the neighbors, he mostly kept to himself, worked nights, and was rarely seen during the day. A few remembered seeing Audrey talking to him, casually over the fence on occasion. One neighbor even mentioned spotting Kellan on Audrey's porch the week prior, though they couldn't confirm if he'd gone inside. When police knocked on Kellan's door, he answered calmly. He claimed he didn't know Audrey well, only as a neighbor. Said she had helped him pick out paint colors for his living room once, and that was it. He allowed them to walk through his house, which appeared neat and sparse. Nothing inside screamed danger or foul play. But it was outside, in the backyard, that something caught the officer's attention: a fire pit, still containing ashes from a recent burn. It looked like someone had disposed of several fabric pieces and wood scraps. Small, unrecognizable bone fragments were also discovered within the ashes. The items were bagged and sent for forensic testing. In the meantime, the community spiraled into fear. Candlelight vigils were held in Audrey's honor. Flyers with her photo appeared in every shop window. But the police knew this was no longer a missing persons case. They had no body, no cause of death, but deep down, everyone feared the same thing. Audrey Griffin was never coming home. Detective Mara Litham returned to the neighborhood with a growing list of questions. The bone fragments found in Kellan Varnett's backyard were being analyzed, but she couldn't afford to wait for results. Something about Kellan's demeanor struck her as off, not nervous or scared, but distant, as if emotionally detached from the gravity of the situation. She had seen people like him before. They were either innocent and numb or guilty and pretending. Either way, she couldn't let her guard down. She began digging into Kellan's past. The name Kellan Varnett yielded almost nothing online. No social media presence, no local family, no work history that could be verified. The only details they had came from the rental application for the house he lived in, a short work reference and a listed position as a night shift inventory clerk at a warehouse. But even that job turned out to be questionable when contacted. The warehouse claimed they had no employee by that name. Meanwhile, Imogen tried to make sense of it all. She told the detectives that Audrey had mentioned feeling uneasy lately, though she hadn't gone into detail. She had written in her journal about someone watching her from a distance, someone who gave her an odd feeling. That journal, found tucked under her bed, became one of the most critical pieces of evidence. In it, Audrey had described interactions with Kellan, brief ones that seemed friendly at first, but later became more unsettling. She wrote about him standing too close during conversations, asking deeply personal questions, and showing up at odd times with excuses like needing help, picking curtains, or wanting to borrow tools. Detective Litham began to piece together a disturbing timeline. Kellan had first approached Audrey the week he moved in, appearing polite and reserved. But as the days passed, he became more intrusive. Several neighbors confirmed seeing him walk past Audrey's house multiple times a day. One elderly neighbor recalled Kellan once standing across the street, just staring at Audrey's windows for nearly 15 minutes before walking off. The forensic results returned. The fabric found in the fire pit was confirmed to be part of a designer blouse, one Imogen immediately identified as something Audrey owned. The small bone fragments were human, and preliminary testing suggested they belonged to a female adult. Though not yet a full confirmation, the pieces were falling into place, and all of them pointed toward Kellan. Detective Litham obtained a warrant for a deeper search of Kellan's home. This time, they combed through everything: floorboards, crawl spaces, attic corners. In a locked cupboard in the basement, officers discovered a box filled with what they later referred to as keepsakes. Inside were items no one had reported missing but were easily identifiable: a hairbrush with long blonde strands, a half-used perfume bottle that matched the one on Audrey's dresser, and most disturbingly printed photos of Audrey. Some were candid street shots taken from a distance. Others appeared to be taken through a window. Likely without her knowledge, Kellan was brought in for further questioning. But again, he maintained that he barely knew Audrey and hadn't seen her the day she disappeared. He had no explanation for the items found in his possession, claiming they must have belonged to the home's previous tenant. But Detective Litham had heard enough lies in her career to know when someone was hiding something. The coldness in Kellan's eyes didn't come from shock or confusion, it came from control. Behind the scenes, her team began searching deeper for anything that could reveal the truth about who Kellan really was. If he wasn't who he claimed to be, then the answer might lie in his identity, not just what he did, but why he did it. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became. Kellan hadn't just stumbled into Audrey's life, he had chosen her. And the reason was buried in a past that he had tried very hard to erase. Asterisk. Detective Mara Litham's suspicions about Kellan Varnett intensified with every new discovery. His lack of digital footprint was more than unusual, it was intentional. In today's world, almost everyone left some kind of trace online. But Kellan seemed to exist only on paper, and barely even there. It was enough to prompt a deeper investigation into his identity, this time with the help of a criminal data analyst. Within a few days, a breakthrough surfaced. Kellan Varnett wasn't his real name. He had once been known as Silas Mears, a name linked to a disturbing past. As a teenager, Kellan was involved in a high-profile court case alongside his older brother, Silas Mears. Silas had been convicted of a brutal crime, a classmate's torture and murder, carried out in a remote part of Western Australia. The case had drawn national attention for its savagery and the young age of those involved. While Silas was sentenced to psychiatric incarceration, Kellan was just 13 at the time. Though he wasn't convicted, psychologists had noted troubling behavior in him during the trial. He was described as quiet, intelligent, and emotionally flat. With signs of detachment from reality, Kellan was placed in a long-term care facility under psychiatric observation, where he remained for several years. His records were sealed due to his age. But upon turning 21, he changed his name and relocated. He essentially disappeared from public view, aided by privacy laws and a system designed to give rehabilitated juveniles a second chance. Until now, no one had connected Kellan Varnett to the child once deemed a danger to others. Detective Lytham presented this information to her team. Understanding what it meant, they weren't just looking at a disturbed neighbor. They were possibly facing a man with a history of deep psychological trauma and unchecked obsession. She started to re-examine every piece of evidence with this in mind. Audrey's journal entries took on new weight. What she had described, his intense staring, the strange visits, the awkward compliments, fit the behavioral profile of a man who didn't just want to be near her. He wanted to possess her. More chilling was the discovery that Silas Mears had recently been released from psychiatric custody. Quietly, with court supervision, he had relocated to a different state, supposedly under strict parole conditions. Yet there were no recent check-ins on record. It was only after an urgent request to interstate law enforcement that another layer of the mystery came to light. Silas had been missing for nearly 2 months. His parole officer had filed a report, but it had received little attention. No one knew where he was. Investigators now believed Silas may have reunited with Kellan, perhaps even influencing or aiding him. It wasn't just a theory, it was becoming the most likely explanation. Kellan may not have acted alone. The idea sent chills through Detective Lytham's team. If Silas was involved, they were dealing with someone with an established history of violence and manipulation. To explore this possibility, officers reviewed CCTV footage from a gas station near Audrey's neighborhood, taken 2 nights before she went missing. A hooded man matching Silas's build and gait could be seen entering the store and purchasing duct tape, rope, and gloves. He paid in cash and never looked directly at the camera. The footage had gone unnoticed during the initial review, but now it was a critical lead. Silas had been in town. The pieces were finally fitting together. Meanwhile, the forensic team found partial DNA on the remnants of the burned fabric from Kellan's fire pit. It matched Audrey. With mounting evidence, an arrest warrant was filed not just for Kellan, but now also for Silas Mears, Audrey's suspected killer or accomplice. What began as the strange disappearance of a woman with a bright future was now unraveling into something far darker, a coordinated plan between 2 brothers with a shared, disturbing history. Audrey hadn't been randomly targeted. She had become the latest fixation in a cycle that had started long ago. And now the past was coming back with a vengeance. The basement of Kellan Varnett's house became the focal point of the investigation. After discovering the box of Audrey's personal items, the forensic team began a full forensic sweep of the space. The room itself was bare concrete floors, exposed beams, and a single overhead bulb that flickered weakly. But something was off about the southern wall. Detectives noticed faint, uneven seams along the surface. When specialists carefully removed a section of drywall, they uncovered a hidden chamber no one had known existed. What they found inside disturbed even the most seasoned officers. The chamber was small, no larger than a walk-in closet, with no ventilation or windows. The walls were soundproofed. Inside, there was a single mattress on the floor, restraints bolted to the wall, and an old mirror placed directly across from the bedding. On a narrow shelf sat a pair of reading glasses, a half-empty bottle of water, and a crumpled scarf later identified as Audrey's. Though there was no blood, the implications were horrifying. This room wasn't just a hiding space. It was designed for captivity. Detective Mara Litham ordered a complete forensic examination of the chamber. Fibers matching Audrey's clothing were collected from the mattress. A few strands of hair also matched her DNA. It became clear that before her body had been burned, Audrey had likely been held in that room. Investigators now had an answer to a terrible question. They knew where Audrey had spent her final moments. As the investigation deepened, attention turned once again to Silas Mears. A week after the arrest warrant was issued, police received an anonymous tip about a man squatting in an abandoned property outside Newcastle. When officers arrived, they found Silas inside. He surrendered without resistance, eerily calm, as though he had been waiting to be caught. During the initial interview, he refused to speak. But his backpack revealed what words did not. Inside were printed photographs of Audrey, many of which matched those found in Kellan's basement. Among the items recovered was a USB drive labeled Reflection. When detectives opened it, they found video files, each carefully labeled by date. Some were recordings of Audrey walking home, eating at cafes, or jogging through the park. They appeared to be taken from a distance, likely by phone camera. Others were darker footage from inside the hidden chamber. In one video, a woman who appeared to be Audrey sat silently on the mattress, arms crossed, expression vacant. Though no violence was shown, the psychological torment was clear. The presence of these files confirmed what the investigators had feared. Audrey had been watched, followed, and eventually taken by the brothers working together. Further analysis revealed that Kellan and Silas had maintained regular contact through encrypted messaging apps. Their exchanges suggested long-standing plans to reclaim control and finish what was started. Police uncovered references to past victims, though not all names could be traced. It raised the haunting possibility that Audrey wasn't the first. She may have been the first to bring them down, but not the first to suffer. At the heart of it all was Kellan, whose polished facade had deceived the community. His home had been a carefully constructed illusion of normalcy, perfect law and tidy interiors, friendly greetings. Beneath that surface was a man shaped by years of darkness, whose childhood trauma had not faded, only evolved. Silas had emerged as the mastermind, but Kellan was the vessel that brought their twisted fantasies to life. Detective Litham stood in the basement one final time, absorbing the silence. The case had revealed more than a murder. It had pulled the veil off a long-hidden nightmare that began with one family's violent legacy. Audrey Griffin had unknowingly stepped into the crosshairs of that legacy, a woman full of light, consumed by two shadows that had haunted each other for decades. What remained now was justice. The brothers were both in custody. The evidence was overwhelming, but no sentence could undo what they had taken. The chamber was sealed, the house eventually sold. Yet, for those who had seen it, the memory of that small, silent room would never fade. It stood as a haunting reminder of the danger that sometimes lives quietly right next door. Asterisk. The trial of Kellan Varnett and Silas Mears captured national attention. For weeks, the courtroom was filled with journalists, spectators, and members of the community who had once believed their neighborhood was the safest place to live. Now, they were watching the two men at the center of a horror story unfold, piece by piece. Kellan sat quietly through most of the proceedings, his expression blank, as if disconnected from the reality of what was happening around him. Silas, on the other hand, stared ahead with an unsettling calmness, occasionally offering a smirk or shrug as evidence was presented. Their demeanor only deepened the public's perception of them as cold, calculated predators. Prosecutors built their case meticulously, walking the jury through a disturbing chain of events. They presented Audrey's journal, the fire pit evidence, the photographs, and most damning of all, the USB drive found in Silas's bag. Forensic analysts testified about the hidden chamber, describing its layout and purpose in chilling detail. The defense attempted to suggest that Silas was solely responsible and had manipulated Kellan, who was mentally unwell and incapable of resisting his brother's influence. But the evidence told a different story, one of active participation, planning, and concealment. Imogen Rise took the stand and recounted Audrey's final weeks, how she had grown nervous, withdrawn, and increasingly paranoid. She spoke about the messages Audrey had left unfinished in her drafts folder, notes that revealed fear but no clear cause. The jury listened closely as she described the last morning she waited for her friend to arrive, never imagining it would be the start of a nightmare. Her words brought tears to many, reminding everyone that Audrey wasn't just a victim in a news story. She had been a real person, full of hope, creativity, and kindness. After several days of deliberation, the jury returned with its verdict. Both Kellan and Silas were found guilty of kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, and the murder of Audrey Griffin. The sentencing was swift. Each was handed a life sentence with no possibility of parole. The courtroom fell into a heavy silence as the verdict was read aloud, broken only by muffled sobs from Audrey's loved ones. But the case wasn't over. Following the trial, detectives began revisiting unsolved missing persons reports from the past decade, focusing on areas where Kellan and Silas had previously lived. They were determined to find out if there were more victims, others who had vanished without a trace, never suspected to be connected. The digital evidence hinted at more than just Audrey. In one message thread, Silas referred cryptically to earlier mistakes and unfinished lessons. No names were mentioned, but the implication was haunting. The house where Audrey had been held was demolished a few months after the trial ended. No one in the neighborhood could bear to look at it. The lot was turned into a small memorial garden with a plaque bearing Audrey Griffin's name. People left flowers there regularly, some who knew her, others who didn't. Her story had become a symbol not just of tragedy, but of resilience and the need to stay vigilant, even in places that seem safe. Detective Mara Litham, though hardened by years in homicide, admitted this case had left a mark on her. She couldn't forget the quietness of the chamber, or the way Kellan had mirrored normalcy so convincingly. What haunted her most was how close the danger had been, how easily evil had blended into the fabric of everyday life. She used the case to train younger detectives, urging them to look beyond the surface, to trust their instincts when something didn't feel right. Audrey's story was eventually featured in a national documentary, not for shock value, but to remind people of the quiet courage she had shown in her final days and the darkness she unknowingly walked into. In the end, justice was served. But the echoes of her story would live on, whispered through every small town that once believed such horror could never happen there. ****